We're trying to solve a problem here.
Tomorrow's going to be very exciting.
We are so excited about the future.
I will build your roads.
We don't need roads.
Hello, and welcome to Solving for Tomorrow, Tales from the Tech Frontier, the show about tackling the biggest problems in the universe with technology. I'm your host, Brian Geisel, CEO of Geisel Software. I'm excited today. I'm here with Vall Herard, CEO of Saifr.ai, a Fidelity Labs company. Now, Saifr provides advanced AI models for content style analysis and risk detection, and helps financial institutions protect themselves and their customers from an ever-changing landscape of scams, threats, and regulatory violations. Val, welcome. So glad to have you here today.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you for having me.
I'm looking forward to diving into this conversation. I start with, you've got this impressive 25-year history in leadership at all these top international banks and institutions, financial institutions, all this kind of stuff. What sent you to Saifr.ai from all of that?
Well, thank you for that question, Brian. I started off my career on Wall Street, as you mentioned, and even that in itself was by accident. I was studying engineering and mathematical economics, and I had a professor who said, if you can solve a linear set of equations, that there are these things called derivatives that are traded on Wall Street. That might be a good career for you. And so I looked into it, and I ended up on Wall Street. And after a while, I wanted to travel, and I wanted to be in technology. That was always curious to me. And so I left and became a consultant. And through that process, studied a couple of financial technology companies, ended up running a couple of them as well. And after we sold the last company, I was doing some consulting, and the opportunity to come into Fidelity as an entrepreneur in resident came up. So that's how I ended up at Fidelity Labs, which is the incubator part of Fidelity Investments.
Okay, very cool. And I somewhere in there, I think you have a degree in something called quantitative analysis. Is that true?
Yeah, so I have a degree in mathematical finance and what a lot of people now call financial engineering. So that's essentially using a lot of the math from engineering to solve financial related problems. So I'm sure that some in your audience have heard of the Black-Scholes equation that's used to price option products. So think about those kinds of models. That's where I started my career, building pricing models for complex derivatives products that are traded on Wall Street.
Oh, that's really interesting. So question, now that you guys are in AI, which we'll get into in a second here, but I'm curious, are you involved in that aspect of the business? So you're CEO, so you're running the business. So maybe it's relevant or maybe it's not. But I'm curious, does that cross over to help on the AI side at all?
Yes, actually, one of my favorite pastimes is spending time with our data scientists, thinking through some of the issues that they are confronted with, whether it's client issues, whether it's a new way of thinking about how we approach solving a problem. So I enjoy having that conversation, those kinds of conversations, just as much as running the business. But my primary focus is ensuring that we achieve the roadmap that we've set for the company. And so most of the times I'm hands off, leaving the data scientists to focus on their job. Sometimes I'm a distraction to them.
I like that. Most people's what was the phrase? Favorite pastime is swinging on a tire swing. So I can relate to the kinds of things that other people don't find favorite pastimes, like discussing math with data scientists.
Yes.
That's awesome. The stuff that you guys are doing today is really interesting on a number of fronts. I think it's interesting from the AI standpoint. I think it's interesting from the threat and security analysis standpoint. Why don't you just walk us through quickly what Saifr's doing and a little bit of the context there, and then let's dive into some of those pieces.
Sure. So Saifr's mission is to make AI safe, or to make it safer, as we like to say around here. And in financial services in particular, and other regulated industry, the idea of safety is really reflected in regulations that are intended to protect the end user. So for most of the public, this shows up in the fact that you cannot be out there selling a financial product and being misleading, and or doing false advertising, if you want to put it in broader context. What that means is really, if you are using AI, for example, to create content, which is one of the use cases that's used widely in the industry with the advent of ChatGPT. So if you have a model that's creating content for you, what comes out of that model needs to comply with financial services regulations before you can use it. Above and beyond that, once the model creates a piece of content for you, you might go in there and edit it, because no model is perfect. They're going to get things wrong. You're going to have to go in there and do some editing yourself. We act as a grammar check for compliance. Essentially, whether it's human-derived content, whether it's AI, whether it's combination of a human working with AI to create content, we can check that content to make sure that it's compliant with financial services regulations. So that's one aspect of what we do. Email generation is done via AI for the most part, and then people will write their own emails. They'll make edits to what the AI has generated. And so we have capabilities to check to see content that's going out, whether it's institution to institution. So for example, you cannot, if you're working at a financial institution, collude with someone at another financial institution to involve yourself in insider trading, let's say, for example. So we've created AI models that can monitor that kind of content and ensure that it complies with financial services regulations, or at least it flags potential issues that may give rise to a violation of the rules. And we've built AI capabilities where we can look to identify potential bad actors and a financial crimes compliance perspective. So that includes know your customer rules that have been in the books for a while, anti-money laundering rules that have also been in the books for a while. So if a bad actor derives, let's say, profits from some sort of illicit activity, and they're using the US financial system or some financial system to launder that money, there are rules and regulations that companies have to follow when they onboard an individual, as well as the continuous monitoring of those individuals, because great clients go bad sometimes. And so we've built AI capabilities that help them identify potential bad actors that they may not want to have on their platform.
Okay, awesome. So let me ask you, like, what percentage of the code, or however you might think about it, that you're using for those things is procedural versus AI? Because I imagine some set of those things is, if it's less than $10,000, and you probably don't want to use AI for that, it's a direct rule or whatever that you're like. How do you think about that, or how's that lay out in your products?
Well, not speaking specifically to the example that you've just mentioned, but
Sure.
our approach is to use AI as much as possible. And there's a simple reason for that. Once you start getting into rules-based systems, then you are putting the burden on the part of the client to keep evolving and maintaining that rule library. And over time, we think that tools such as AI are intended to help augment, but not create more work for the end user. And so consequently, you may have a rule, let's say today, that says, well, if it's less than 10,000 or whatever the amount is, well, tomorrow, that may actually give rise to a potential tripping of a new risk management policy where now you need to change the rule. So someone needs to go in the system and change the rule and maintain it. And so through AI, we believe that adaptive systems that can learn your own risk appetite over time. What sort of customer profile are you interested in? For example, how do you write content from a compliance perspective that reflects your own risk appetite? Because although the rules are the same for everyone, but different companies will have different levels of risk that they can tolerate. And so we believe that an adaptive process through AI is the better way to go. And so we try and focus primarily on building AI models.
Yeah. And how do you keep those up to date with if they're like helping with compliance or that aspect of things and the compliance is changing?
Yes, so that's one of the main aspects of our business is the fact that we have subject matter experts as part of our team. In many respects, we have a team of people dedicated to somewhat of a new department, if you will, that you didn't used to have in the past, which is called our compliance and legal engineering department. So that's essentially a new kind of job that's been created because of the advent of AI, which is to understand how can we uh, look at either proposed regulation or else existing regulation, and how would that impact the behavior of the model, and what are some of the changes that we need to make in order for us to make sure that we can account for changes in regulations. And even in some instances, there may be regulations that exist, but there's a new interpretation by the regulator because there's a new use case that's come up, for example. And so uh, regulatory compliance is always evolving, and all models have to keep up to date. And we've built the mechanism to allow us to do that by one, keeping uh, uh, very close watch on what's happening on the regulatory front. So we work with our regulatory compliance team. Uh, they are able to look at new regulations and work with our engineering team and see how can they reflect the changes in regulation in the actual software and code that we are building.
Yeah, that's very cool. And love how those kinds of things are creating new jobs. Like obviously there's data scientists and things that are relatively new in the scope of the world. But that keep up, who's doing the keep up there in terms of like the engineering tied to the regulation? Like how does that work for you guys?
Well, this is where the regulatory and legal engineering meets data science world. Essentially, data scientists, they understand numbers, they're math people, and they understand code. But they need someone to explain how the regulations work, and
Yeah,
who
like
can
the
also
subject matter expert side.
exactly. And then the regulatory subject matter experts need to understand how they need to provide the data in a way in which the data science can consume it. So, for example, with the advent of agentic AI, which is this idea that now we can add what I call backspace to AI, which is the ability, if a model is hallucinating, the ability for it to go back, correct itself by trying different answers and scoring those answers so that it can learn from those answers so that it doesn't repeat and can remember uh, the corrections that it's made so that it doesn't repeat the same mistake over time. Well, you need someone with the subject matter expertise who can understand, well, if you generate a piece of content that may look perfectly fine, but through a regulatory lens, there may be something that is suggestive in what was created that they may be inappropriate, that may be misleading to an investor, let's say, for example. you need a subject matter expert who can do that sort of interpretation and not rely on a data scientist who's just going to read the sentence and say, "Oh, this content looks perfectly fine to me." So this is where the world of compliance, legal engineering meets data science. And so we have both set of skills on our team because of the question that you asked earlier. These regulations change, new regulations are added. And so consequently, companies have to safeguard their consumers and safeguard themselves as well. And so we need to keep evolving our technology to keep up.
And the cool thing I think about that, for just to step away from it for 1 second, is we keep talking about how these innovations, some people are worried about us losing jobs because of the things we're able to automate, which we've been automating the world for a really long time now. But I think the kinds of jobs you just described are the kinds I wouldn't think of. I'm not going to go, oh, the confluence of data science and subject matter experts in regulatory matters is a new field that's going to emerge from this, but it does anyway.
Well, the way that I look at it is that I remember speaking at a conference in London last year. And when I was explaining the technology and what we do, one of the questions that came from the audience was, well, how many compliance jobs is this going to take away? And I said, well, I politely would ask differently is how many jobs is this going to create? And so just as us having the ability to check for grammar didn't stop us from writing, right? The fact that in Microsoft Word or whatever technology that you're using to write, we can check for grammatical errors, we can check for misspelled words. That's technology that made it easier for us to write. It didn't take our ability to write away. So similarly, I think that you will have displacements, certainly as new technologies emerge, new jobs are created, and people naturally move to those new sectors. And so I think that you will see displacement. But the idea that somehow AI is going to replace people, I think the jury is still out on that one, and I would bet on humans if I was a betting person.
Yeah. No, and I think we're always moving people to more interesting jobs or more purpose fulfilling jobs as we come towards these things, which is what we're all looking for, that purpose side of things.
Well, yes, and I would go even so far as to say, just as the invention of the car meant that you had more people driving and so on and so forth, and you didn't need someone to drive the wagon anymore, right?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that society is better off for it. And so I don't want to be naive in thinking that there will not be displacements.
Right.
Obviously, there will be some job displacements, but that happens with every piece of technology that's ever been invented.
Yeah. That's a great way to say it. So I want to ask about, you're talking about, I think specific to LLMs, is they're generating some of this data, and we know the issues of hallucination. And you were mentioning the system in which you're going back and having it generate a few answers and then scoring them. So one of the things I'm interested in is Sam Altman has talked a lot about just make the model better. We're making the model so much better so fast that just stay focused on making the model better, and tomorrow the model will have solved the problem already. Versus a lot of things that we're sort of adding on or layering to, and I think OpenAI is doing a fair amount of this also, is layering things on to help correct it. Or certainly OpenAI has done stuff like filter for explicit words and make sure the answer doesn't include that, or you can't ask it inappropriate things or whatever. How do you think, and how are you guys working on this in terms of, do we just make the model better always? Do we put something in to correct after the model's done always? Is there a mix? How are you thinking about that?
Yes. So, I mean, I think this goes back to the question that or to the statement that I made earlier, in that Safer's mission is to make AI safer. And the way in which we're doing that is by looking at how we can add a regulatory guardrail on top of AI for the things that we already have uh, in the books, insofar as regulation is concerned. In a lot of industries, you have regulation that are intended to protect consumers. And if I look at the EU AI Act, where, for example, one of the basic tenets of the EU AI Act is that AI needs to comply with existing laws. Well, how do you make that happen? This is where Safer steps in. And so those sort of models, so one of the models that we've created is the ability for us to detect uh, content that may be non-compliant from a regulatory lens, a financial services regulatory lens, and then suggest language in terms of how you can make it compliant within the context of what you are trying to write. Uh, we think that's a useful solution. We think that's a way in which we can make the models better by adding that additional guardrail on top of AI, if you will. And so there are other companies working on solutions for other industries as well. But we think that in instances where uh, the use of technology can be used to make the technology better, uh, is a, is net positive when it comes to adoption of AI in certain industries.
Yeah. I, so, okay. So that has so many questions now. So one of them is you're focused on financial today. Do you foresee that Safer will eventually be guardrail for AI more generally, or do you think you'll always be focused on financial regulatory environment, and so forth?
So we have a roadmap for financial services, and we're going to execute against that roadmap. That notwithstanding, however, uh, the kind of technology that we are building has application across other industries as well. And so while I'm not here to announce what other industry segments we may move into, but you can imagine a world where uh, you have rules that are that's intended to protect consumers of whatever the product may be. It happens to be in financial services, financial products, but it could be automobiles, it could be other industries as well, where you have rules, pharmaceutical industry, for example, where you have rules that are not that different in spirit in terms of the underlying tenets of consumer protection, where Safer might have a role to play. But as I mentioned before, our focus right now is squarely on financial services. Uh, and that's where we're going to focus for the next while, because we think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that shop.
That makes a lot of sense. And another piece of you had mentioned earlier, like the EU regulations about AI. The Biden administration had put out a executive order regarding AI, and AI is so still wild west, which is I think one of the issues about regulation and how do we guardrail against it and these kinds of things. How do you think about the other side of it also, where in technology development, you need to have some sort of freedom to be able to innovate and figure out what it is that you're even innovating? How do you think about the intertwining of those two pieces and the balance of those at all?
Yeah, so generally, as a rule, I don't comment on pending regulations, but I do think that Safer's role in trying to make AI safer is in keeping with this idea of innovation. Because we think that if we can provide a layer that can sit on top of AI to ensure that as you're innovating and building, that it is consistent with consumer protection laws, for example, we think that gives companies the space to innovate while having those guardrails in place. That protects the consumer, that addresses some of the concerns that regulators have brought up. And so that's the focus of Safer. And we think that's a worthwhile pursuit.
Yeah. I, I love that. That's a really interesting philosophy from the standpoint uh, of how you do it, where AI, like, I want to see it blossom. I want to see them be able to innovate as quickly as possible. But to your point, we're using it in stuff like financial services, and we're using it in things where it could cause harm if it does the wrong thing. And so I really like that perspective. That's really interesting, that Safer gives you this ability to innovate, and then Safer is the one that gives you the guardrails against if it's hallucinating or if it's doing something that it shouldn't. And I think that's a really important role for a piece that could help AI innovate.
Yes, and so that's why we think the mission of making AI safer is a critical one, because we believe that AI adoption is going to go up by us
Mm.
making it safer.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because I was curious, as we started talking about doing this podcast, I thought it's interesting that you wanted to apply AI in financial services when AI is generally, you don't want it dealing with numbers from the standpoint of, like we were talking about before, the deterministic kind of thing. So it was an interesting, why choose finance? So it makes a lot of sense in that context.
Yes, we think there are two reasons why we went into finance. We think the application in finance is a worthwhile one. Um, Not that consumer protection with large is important, no matter which industry segment that you're in, but we think in financial services, uh, uh, because of the regulatory scrutiny that's applied to financial services, we thought that made sense for us to do. And then don't forget the fact that what's allowing us to do this is the high quality granular data that we have access to by working within Fidelity investments, if you will, or within Fidelity Labs, which is the innovation arm of Fidelity Investments. And so there's a lot of high quality, granular, non sensitive client data, non client data that we have access to, that's allowing us to build some of the models that we've built. And so I think that gave us an advantage. And that's what we are using to essentially bring these products to market. And I think that's one of the reasons why earlier in the week, we announced a partnership with Microsoft where the Safer models will be available on the Microsoft Azure AI model catalog for other companies. Let's say that you're an app builder and you're building something for financial services, and the content of the thing that you're building needs to be compliant. You can go to the Microsoft AI model catalog and use all models to ensure that the content that your application is going to be building is compliant. And so we think that there's a lot of good that comes out of that for the industry and for everyone concerned.
And congrats on that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
That's really great. So I'm curious, as you guys are training AI, a lot of companies that are training things today are starting to get to the point where GPUs have gotten faster and faster. We've been able to handle more and more data. They're starting to run out of data. Have you guys started to deal with that and figured out how do we increase the amount of data that we have, whether it's synthetic data or it's finding new ways to get data? Are you guys dealing with that, or is that a problem you're needing to solve?
Well, yes, I think that's a problem that the industry needs to solve in general. I've seen some estimates by 2028, 2030, the supply of quality data that's out in the open, right? So this is not private data that companies have. That's going to run out. And so certainly companies that are using public data for training, they need to solve that problem. But one of the interesting facts is that when you are solving very specific tasks, uh, if you have access to high quality granular data, what I would describe as textbook data, right? Essentially, if you were to teach someone about a subject and you were to go and get a textbook that's well written, right? Where you go into the details of the subject that you are trying to teach someone about, you don't need as much data to build high quality models. And so we've seen examples of this from Microsoft itself with their Phi 3 family of models, where they're able to build a small language model that used high quality data. And that model outperforms large language models when it comes to writing code, for example, because it's trained very specifically on high quality data designed for writing code. And so consequently, it produced better results when tested versus large language models that have been trained on vast quantities of data. In many respects, this is what Saifr has been able to tap into since our inception. The availability of high quality data from a firm such as Fidelity that has a reputation for compliance rigor allowed us to build small models, but yet very efficient models that understand financial services context and they thus able to uh, not have to consume as much data to produce a high quality product.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, on another side from something that you said there, I just want to announce to everyone in 2028 through 2030 that Val and I are here in this podcast today to produce some great data for you. So you have just a little bit more data today in your data set.
I love it.
No, it's an interesting problem that the industry is facing. But I love what you said about small language models. That's really interesting. I'm curious the things that you're solving today. You mentioned some email and some things that I presume are large language model things. How much of what you're helping solve today is LLM stuff versus other forms of machine learning?
Well, I think we don't make the distinction because of, again, the safety layer that we are adding. So whether someone is using any of the large language models, whether it's Llama, whether it's GPT, whichever large language, Mistral, whether you're using a large language model or a small language model, it's going to produce content, and that content needs to be compliant. The models that we build can sit on top of any large language model, on top of any small language model. It can reside uh, in the applications that someone is using to build content. One of the more interesting use cases, for example, we have is a client in financial services that use influencers to help promote some of their products. Those influencers produce TikTok videos. They produce videos that go on social media, and they needed a solution to check that what was being produced was compliant. So someone can create a video, they can upload it into our system. We can take that and transcribe it, and then we can look through that video and say, hey, this is potentially non-compliant. And so before the video is even posted, someone can get a sense of what they need to correct before they post it, so that they're not misleading the consumer. We think that's a worthwhile exercise to do. We think that allows companies to express themselves and be innovative while still being compliant with rules intended to protect the consumer. Um, and so, from that perspective, the models that we provide, they're multimodal. So whether it's text that they're generating, whether it's video that they are generating, whether it's an image, because an image can potentially be non-compliant as well. You can potentially mislead an investor if they're investing in, let's say, low yield certificate of deposit, but yet you have a poster of a $200 million yacht in there. That could potentially be misconstrued. Or worse yet, you might have a money tree where money is growing from the tree. So being able to detect those kinds of images within the context, right, that they're being used to say, hey, this is potentially misleading to the public, and here's what you can do to correct for it. We think that's worthwhile, and that works irrespective of a large language model, or small language model, or a human just creating content.
I, and you're not suggesting you found a money tree, right? Because we can stop this podcast right now. Let's go. We got some harvesting to do.
Well, still working on that one.
Okay, so we've been talking about a lot of things where it's kind of helping me make sure I'm not screwing this up. But do you guys also deal with anything where there are bad actors involved? And what are the kind of scenarios that we're avoiding by Saifr existing?
Yes. So one of the capabilities that we've built is the ability to look a user, whether that, and by user, I'm being very generic here. It could be someone who's opening a brokerage account at a financial institution. And one of the requirements that you have to do as part of the onboarding process is to do a screen on that individual, because regulators have an interest in keeping certain activity out of the financial services network. And also, companies have a duty to make sure that if someone is involved, let's say, in terrorism financing, or they're involved in some kind of illicit activity, that they're not leveraging the US financial system to commit whatever bad act that they may be committing. And so we have an ability that allows us to, that allows companies to comply with those rules by screening who the bad actors are. And then we provide a lead, if you will, an indication to companies so that they can do their own investigation, where we might say, hey, you have a population of 3 million, 5 million, 10 million, 20 million customers that you need to do this on a nightly basis. These 5 or 6 customers are worth taking a second look at. And the reason why we built this capability is that, as you might imagine, if you need to do this in an overnight basis, it is extremely difficult for you to hire enough people to actually do that. And so this is where AI technology can help solve that scaling problem, but also can work at the instance where someone is opening up a brokerage account, so that you can do an initial client onboarding check on that person as well.
Okay, that's interesting. And what about, like, do I need to worry about stuff like my own accounts? And is there any worry that somebody might have a way to take over my account through any of stuff that exists out there, deep fakes or whatever? Or is that all far, far in the future?
I think that there's certainly been instances. There was one case in Europe where someone was able to use a deep fake biometrics to actually get a bank to send them money. This is not an area that Saifr currently builds models for, although part of the screening capability that we have can certainly be used in combination with other tools to address. But the area of deep fakes and how you detect deep fakes is an area that's very interesting. It's an area where we think that in coming years, you're going to see evolutions in risk systems being designed to detect those deep fakes to prevent financial crimes from happening.
What does that look like in the future for you? Not necessarily deep fakes, but just how does AI expand or whatever in the next 5, 10, 15 years? What's that future look like, do you think?
I think ultimately they are at the corporate level. There are use cases there are a lot of use cases that haven't been solved yet that will be solved, and where companies are actively trying to solve those use cases. And I think safer trying to make AI safer will allow for more adoption for those use cases. But in terms of, I don't like to speculate about the future, but I think uh, if we were to go back to something that I said earlier in terms of being able to calibrate a model to take into account the risk appetite of an organization, I think ultimately you're not going to have just one large language model. You're going to have almost kind of like a small language model for each person. I think ultimately the idea of having personalized AI that can understand, for example, what are the things that you like or you don't like? How do you speak? So if you are, so that if it's writing a text message for you that you're going to go back and edit, it writes it in the tone of voice that you would normally write. And so I think some of those personalizations, I think we're starting to see some of that happening already. I think we're going to continue to see that because ultimately, if you're customizing it for the needs of the for a company, you can also customize it for the need of the individual. And I think ultimately that's where we're gonna go.
So like PLMs, personal language models.
Yes.
I love that. That's awesome. Okay, so I know you said you don't like to project the future, but that's what we're here for, Val.
Okay.
So when you look off into the future generally, what do you see? What from the things that you guys are solving today, the things that you see in the market more generally, because you're in a particular part of the market that I think a lot of our listeners are not, and that's kind of interesting. What are the things that, what's the world look like in 20 years?
Uh, I think I'll go back to what I was saying earlier in terms of getting personalization right is an issue that I think AI needs to solve. It needs to solve it at the corporate level because what often happens now, and this is no criticism of AI, it happens with every technology. The stuff that you buy off the shelf tends to be very general, and a lot of times adoption is done merely for cosmetic reasons. People are saying that, oh, I'm using AI, but is it really solving a core business issue? I think Safer is an example of the kinds of personalization, although at a corporate level, that I'm speaking about. The idea that there are very specific tasks for very specific things that companies have to do and solve for, and having solution that addresses those needs, I think you're going to see more and more of that in the next 5-10 years. I think as you branch out from there, I think customizing and personalizing AI to the need of the individual, I think you're going to see that happen as well. And so I think the whole idea of personalization of AI, whether at the corporate level or at the individual level, is one of the things that I'm looking forward to the most. And this is what excites me about this field. I think the tremendous work that the team at Safer is doing is a step in the right direction to ensure that the societal benefits of AI are realized while taking into account the safety concerns that consumers and regulators and stakeholders have.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Okay, I'm going to run to a couple of just rapid fire things, like 30 seconds.
Sure.
Here's a couple of.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. So, first, why aren't we in the future 20 years from now? Today, if you had a magic wand, what would you aim it at to just make something different, change laws of physics, whatever it is? What would you use the magic wand for?
I would use my magic wand to help solve the hallucination issues that we have with AI, because I think we've made some advances, as I alluded to earlier. But I think that once we get to a point where it's not ever going to be perfectly solvable, because even we humans, we hallucinate. Sometimes you might say, "Oh, I saw the red car run across the street," and you said the red cat instead. But we are able to catch ourselves and correct ourselves. We say, "Hey, we meant the red car, not the red cat," right? And so I don't think you're ever going to solve it completely. Um, but if I had a magic wand, that's the one problem in AI right now that I would completely make go away.
I love it. Okay, what's the one piece of tech selfishly you couldn't live without?
My phone. I think that in October I was home a total of 5 days. I was on the road. I spoke at a conference in London. Then I flew to Vegas. Spoke at a conference there. Visited the team in Dallas. I was essentially all over the place, and without my phone letting me know what hotel I needed to check into, getting an Uber, show up at the airport on time, I don't think I would have survived. So definitely my phone.
Yeah, I hear that. Okay, flip it the other way. What's one piece of technology you wish we didn't actually have?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I would again, speaking about the phone. I recently saw an article where searches for flip phones have been going up, and so I'm like, why are we bringing flip phones back? And so yes, I wish we would not bring flip phones back.
Awesome. And then what's one piece of technology that you'd like to see in the future?
I think again the personalization of AI. I think AI is meant to be human augmentation. It's not meant to be human replacement. And so I think that the more that these tools can help augment what we do in our daily lives, what we do in our corporate lives, I think society in general is better off for it. And so I think the personalization to solve real world problems in the corporate sector, as well as some of the mundane stuff that we do in our daily lives, I'm looking forward to that.
Nice. Okay. So I got to admit, Val, I could not have imagined a discussion about financial services that dove into so many different interesting things. I loved the conversation, really appreciated diving in and you taking some foray into the future with us with all of this. Give people a little bit more about Saifr, anything coming out that we should know about, and where do we find you guys? How do people engage with Saifr if they want more?
So where to find us is easy. It's Saifr.ai. You go there. We have all ways in which you can contact us. You can also find us on LinkedIn. Uh, I spoke about the announcement and the partnership we have with Microsoft. I'm going to be in Chicago next week at Microsoft Ignite, speaking to the industry in terms of what this partnership means for us and for the industry writ large. Um, I'm not going to make any product predictions yet, but I think 2025 is going to be a uh, a year where Saifr is going to do some very interesting things.
I love it. Can I have you do a piece of that again, but spell Saifr for the folks that aren't on video and might not see it?
Sure. So in terms of where to find us, you can find us at Saifr.ai, spell SAIFR.ai.
Awesome. Val, this was such an interesting conversation. Thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciated it. And good luck to all the awesome stuff you guys are doing at Saifr.
No, thank you. Thank you, Brian, for having me. And I really enjoyed our conversation.
Hey, before we start the outro, can you just hand me a pen real quick, Harriet?
Okay, yeah, sure.
Or a pencil or something, whatever you got. I
Yeah.
just want to update my outline. I've got a. What's going on? What's happening?
What's
Why are
wrong?
you holding a lightsaber?
I am
A pink
100%.
lightsaber, nonetheless.
I am 100% sure this is a pencil.
No, it's a lightsaber.
It literally has the eraser right here. It's literally a pencil.
No, that's not an eraser. That's where you smack the Sith in the head.
Wait. Am I hallucinating? Wait.
That's definitely a lightsaber. It's
Maybe
definitely
I
a
guess
secret
it is
lightsaber that we have no idea where it came from at Geisel Software.
Okay.
But it brings up a good point, Harriet.
Yeah. Okay, maybe I was hallucinating. Let's say I was. But now that I think about it, I think in the podcast, in this episode, Val talked about hallucination in LLMs. Has that happened to you before? I think that might have happened to me before.
For sure. If you've used an LLM for more than 2 minutes, it has hallucinated. And hallucinations in LLMs are funny because they're different than the way people hallucinate.
Yeah.
There's a bound around where people hallucinate, or else we call it Alzheimer's or dementia or something significant. But even there, somebody wouldn't hallucinate the difference between a pencil and a lightsaber.
Yeah.
They might not know who you are or not recognize you. But with an LLM, because it's focused on words and language, it doesn't actually know the concept. And LLM's never held a lightsaber. So the difference between a lightsaber and a pencil might not be that different to an LLM. And so when you're asking questions of ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or Grok 3, they will sometimes hallucinate, and they hallucinate in ways that feel weird to us as humans.
Oh, is that why he brought up the concept of SLLM? No, not SLLM.
LLSLM, LMS, SSM,
So many
LM.
abbreviations in this field. But he brought up the concept of small language models, SLM.
Yes. And yeah, so not enough people talk about their small language models.
Does that not hallucinate enough or something? Is like, I just want to know that. Like, first of all, what it is. And then second of all, if it hallucinates like LLMs.
Yeah, so a small language model is in some sense what it sounds like.
Right.
It is a language model that's trained on a smaller data set than what we call the large language model. Large language model trains on an insanely large data set. And that's why we call them large.
Right.
Versus machine learning's trained on lots and lots of data for decades. Like, that's very normal. But now we train on like the whole internet. Well, that's pretty big. That's a large language model. And we let them train on all of the data. Some crazy data, lies on the internet, they train on all of it. So for a small language model, instead of training on all of the data, we pick just the data that's relevant for the problem we're trying to solve.
Oh.
And so we might train just on, not only just on banking data, but train on just banking data that is correct. Or help files, let's say, from the help desk, and only the ones that solved the problem. Don't train on the ones that didn't solve the problem. Whereas a large language model trains on all the data, and then we rely on the model to figure out which ones were helpful and which ones weren't, and focus on the ones that were. But it might not be. You ask a large language model how to solve a problem or how to fix something on your computer, it will often get it right, but sometimes it will tell you something totally wrong, very confidently. It'll tell you the wrong way to solve the problem. So small language models, it's not that they don't hallucinate. They still have the same inherent structure as a large language model.
Yeah.
It's just they're trained on successes, which means they're less likely to make mistakes in that training domain. And we use much less training and much less training material in order to build the small language model.
So yeah, so small language models, it seems like they're training on like a more accurate, concise data, and they're not like using the entire internet to basically help their machine. That kind of reminds me of what we're doing with Simage, our new product. Like, I'm not trying to throw our product out there right now, but I think that's what we're doing. What we do is to help your models get better. So is there a way where we could be using, small language models? Do we use small language models?
Yeah, now that you mention it, it's a good point because Simage, as
Right.
you know, is a synthetic data generator.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason to generate synthetic data is not to just have more random data,
Right.
but to have correct data
Mm-hmm.
or data that fills in your model.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a sense, you can in fact train a smaller model if you've got
Yeah.
better data. So the point of Simage is whether it's image or video data or financial records or personal data that is not to a person,
Mm-hmm.
but actually just synthetic created data for a person, right? So we can't tie it back to an actual person, but it reflects what an actual person might look like with number of children and what they might pay for college and what their income might be and all these kinds of things. So as we create those records, you're right, then a model is able to train on data that we decide is correct.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that's cool about creating the data is as we create it, we know if it's correct or incorrect.
Hmm.
So you might also want to train a model on data that's incorrect,
Right. To
but
get it.
tell it
Yeah.
that it's
and-
incorrect.
Yeah.
Whereas a large language model trains on all this data that's correct and incorrect, and no one's telling it which is which. But in this
Oh.
case, we can give it labeled data that we know is correct. We can say we've generated some bad data and that data is bad, so that it knows what bad data might look like,
Mm-hmm.
all those kinds of things. And so, no, it's a really good point. It does fit that in that then you can use that to train your model better,
Yeah.
which gives you that ability to train on data that use specific. One of the things we talk about sometimes is in the image cases, because sometimes that's, easier to visualize,
Mm-hmm.
but is imagine that you're able to recognize objects amazingly until there's too many weird shadows. There's lots of bright lights, like maybe a studio, and they're throwing shadows at weird angles. That could confuse your computer vision model.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we can do then is we can target the images we generate. We know if there are shadows or not. We know how to generate lots of shadows and so forth. So we can generate exactly the thing that your model is falling over with, and then generate data that will help improve your model.
I'm guessing I understand why Safer is important to financial world then. Like at the end of the day, just like Simage, you do want to use this is a financial realm. It's very sensitive. So you do want to use something specific that's not creating so many hallucinations. I'll definitely look into it a lot more, but I think I'm like really starting to understand why specific things are so important.
Yeah. And I think Val and I were able to talk about it a little bit, but you're not using AI in a financial context to add numbers.
Right.
Turns out we're really good. Computers are really, really good at adding numbers. We're not using AI for that. You're not using AI to tell you if this thing is okay or what, those kinds of things. We're using it in and around the financial world to be able to do other things that we're way less likely to hallucinate about, or in contexts where if you use it to help me find the right button to click and it hallucinates and there's no button there, well, I'm frustrated as a user, but we didn't get falsified financial records or something, right? So I think that's one of the things people tend to get afraid of, is thinking we use AI for everything. And no, it's just a tool. And so we focus it just on the thing that we're trying to solve.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, I like that.
Which, in our case, is
For
tomorrow. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, checking out Solving for Tomorrow. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you did, there are buttons everywhere. Like, subscribe, check us out, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, whatever they come up with tomorrow. We're on it. Thanks so much for listening. Hope you learned something.